The anticipation. Evelyn stood by the grand window of her home, the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass and casting long, golden shadows on the wooden floors. She gazed out into the garden below, watching the gentle sway of the trees, the calmness of the world around her, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions brewing within her. Today was a momentous day. Her son, Julian, was getting married. She had been waiting for this day, perhaps even imagining it in her mind for years, but now that it had finally arrived, Evelyn felt more uncertain than ever. For as long as she could remember, she had been the steady force in Julian's life. She had raised him alone after adopting him as a young boy. Life had not been easy for them. She had worked hard to make ends meet, to give him the best life she could, despite the challenges. Through the years, Evelyn had made many sacrifices, but one thing she never compromised on was her love for Julian. She had poured everything she had into him, her time, her energy, her heart. And now, as he stood on the precipice of a new chapter in his life, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and anxiety. Julian had always been a man of reason, a pragmatist who rarely showed his emotions. Raised by Evelyn, who had always guarded her own heart fiercely, Julian had inherited that same stoic demeanor. He had built a career for himself as a top surgeon, known for his discipline, precision, and unshakable work ethic. Julian had never been one to dwell on relationships or emotional connections. He had always been focused on his goals, driven by a need to prove himself, and nothing seemed to matter more than his professional success. To him, love was a distant concept, one that didn't seem to fit into his carefully constructed life. But recently, things had begun to change. Evelyn had noticed the shift in Julian. For the first time in years, he had spoken of someone with a spark in his eyes. A woman. The way he described her was different. Soft, almost tender, and yet, for someone so reserved, Julian had seemed completely enchanted. Evelyn had never seen him this way before, and the prospect of his marriage brought with it a deep sense of curiosity. She was eager to meet this woman who had captured Julian's heart, but she was also cautious, aware of the fragility of love. It could heal, yes, but it could also break, and Evelyn had learned the hard way that love was not always a reliable force. As she adjusted the delicate fabric of her dress, Evelyn's mind wandered back to the years of sacrifice and effort she had put into raising Julian. There had been times, especially in his younger years, when he had been distant, hard to reach. She had worried then, wondering if she was doing the right thing. But now, looking at the man he had become, Evelyn was filled with a sense of pride. He had grown into someone strong, determined, and successful. And yet, the soft spot that had started to appear in his heart for this woman, his soon-to-be bride, unsettled Evelyn. She had heard little about the woman. Julian spoke highly of her, but the details were vague, as if he were still processing his emotions himself. Evelyn knew enough to be wary, but the thought of her son finding love was something she couldn't help but be excited about. There had been years when she doubted he'd ever open up to anyone enough to love them. And now, on the eve of his wedding, she could only hope that this woman was truly the one for him. Her mind returned to the question that had been swirling in her head for weeks. What kind of woman would Julian choose? He was intelligent, driven, and strong-willed. The woman who caught his attention would need to match his intensity. She would need to be someone who could stand beside him, someone who understood him, someone who would be able to love him fully, despite his hard exterior. And yet, Evelyn found herself wondering whether this woman could live up to the high expectations that Julian would undoubtedly have. The church was just around the corner. She had arrived early, taking a moment to collect her thoughts before the event began. The large doors of the church would soon open, and her son's future would unfold in front of them all. As she stepped outside, the cool breeze kissed her cheeks, and she took a deep breath. The day had arrived, and with it, the uncertainty that came with change. Julian's wedding was not just about the union of two people. It was a reminder that things were shifting in her own life too. She was no longer the center of his world. That place had been taken by someone else, someone she was about to meet. The drive to the church was brief, but Evelyn's thoughts were restless. She drove through the city streets, her mind focused on the moment ahead, on the woman who was about to become her daughter-in-law. She wondered how this woman would fit into their lives, how she would affect their family dynamic. Julian had always been so independent, so focused on his career that it had been easy for Evelyn to forget that someday someone else would take his heart. But this was that day, and Evelyn could only hope that the love Julian had found was real. When she arrived at the church, the grand doors opened before her, and Evelyn stepped into the cool, polished interior. The crowd was buzzing with anticipation, the soft murmur of voices filling the air. She could see Julian standing at the altar, his back straight, his face a mask of calm. He looked every bit the successful, poised surgeon that he was. And as Evelyn watched him, something tugged at her heart, the realization that in this moment he was no longer the boy she had raised. He was a man, ready to make a life of his own. The bride had not yet arrived, but Evelyn could feel the tension building. The guests were seated, the music had started, and the moment was drawing near. And then, the doors opened. The bride entered, her steps graceful, her face radiant. Evelyn's breath caught in her chest as she looked at her. The woman was beautiful, and her smile was warm, but there was something about her that Evelyn couldn't quite place. It was more than just her beauty. There was an air of mystery around her, something that Evelyn couldn't put into words. As the bride made her way down the aisle, Evelyn's eyes locked on one thing: her hand. The left hand, adorned with an engagement ring that seemed to gleam unnaturally in the light. Evelyn's breath faltered, her gaze drawn to the intricate design of the ring. It wasn't just any piece of jewelry, it was unique. Too unique. The room seemed to fall away as Evelyn focused entirely on the ring. The symbols carved into it, the deep green gemstone that almost shimmered with an eerie glow. She had seen something like it before, but where? Her mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She could not tear her gaze away from the hand that held the bouquet. And in that moment, Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. Something was wrong. A deep, unsettling sense of dread gripped her heart. The revelation. Evelyn's heart began to race as the bride continued her slow, graceful walk down the aisle. Her mind swirled with questions, confusion settling over her like a thick fog. The shimmering ring on the bride's hand, so familiar, yet so out of place, held her gaze with an almost hypnotic pull. The air in the church seemed to grow heavier with each step, the soft murmur of the guests drowned out by the frantic pounding in Evelyn's chest. The room had shifted for her. It was as though time itself had slowed down, and Evelyn was suspended in a moment of pure anxiety. She tried to focus on the bride's face, to look beyond the ring and see the woman who had captured Julian's heart, but it was impossible. Her eyes kept drifting back to the hand. The ornate design of the ring seemed to mock her, tugging at a memory that she couldn't quite place. As the bride reached the altar, Julian turned to face her, his expression unreadable. The soft gasp that escaped from the guests was swallowed by the sound of the organ playing in the background. Evelyn watched as Julian's eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, he looked at his bride with a tenderness that only reinforced the knot in her stomach. She had never seen him look like that, and it both unsettled and intrigued her. Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. What was it about this woman that was so unsettling? She had imagined this day so many times in the past. Julian's wedding, the woman who would become his partner, and the life they would build together. But this felt different. Her instincts were on high alert, and she could not shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The ceremony continued, and Evelyn forced herself to focus on the words being spoken, but they felt distant and hollow, as if they were happening in another reality. The minister's voice echoed in the grand church, but it was drowned out by the thudding of Evelyn's own heart in her ears. She glanced over at her son, standing tall and proud, his stoic face betraying none of the inner turmoil she was beginning to feel. This was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of their lives, yet a dark cloud seemed to hang over it. When it came time for the vows, Evelyn noticed the bride's hands again, holding tightly to her bouquet. The ring was unmistakable in its brilliance, its design too intricate, too distinctive. And then it clicked. The memory flooded her mind with a force that almost knocked the breath from her lungs. Years ago, Evelyn had seen that same ring, a piece of jewelry that had once been part of a collection passed down in her own family. It was a ring that belonged to her late mother. Evelyn had forgotten about it until now. She had thought it lost to time, vanished after her mother's passing. But the woman standing before her, the one about to marry her son, was wearing it. Evelyn's mind raced as the realization settled into place. She had to be wrong. This couldn't be possible. Her mother's ring, her mother's legacy, was now on the finger of the woman who would become her daughter-in-law. The connection was impossible to ignore, and it sent a chill through Evelyn's spine. The past had a way of creeping up on people, of revealing itself in the most unexpected ways. And now it was doing just that. Evelyn felt the weight of the moment bearing down on her. The woman standing before her was not who she appeared to be, and Evelyn could not, would not, let this marriage go forward without answers. As the ceremony continued, Evelyn's thoughts whirled. She had to confront the bride. She had to ask the questions that were gnawing at her, to dig into the mystery surrounding this woman and the ring she wore. She knew it wasn't appropriate, not at a wedding, but there was no way she could let this go. Julian deserved the truth, and Evelyn was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. She waited patiently as the vows were exchanged, her mind racing faster than the ceremony itself. Every part of her screamed that something was terribly wrong. The connection between her family and this woman had to be more than just a coincidence. There had to be a reason this ring, a ring so steeped in her family's history, had appeared on the finger of Julian's bride. When the ceremony finally ended, Evelyn felt as though she were underwater, the world around her muffled and distorted. She watched as Julian and his bride turned toward the guests, their smiles radiant. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers filling the church, but Evelyn couldn't join in. She was stuck, frozen in place, staring at the woman who had taken her son's heart. The reception was a blur. Evelyn made polite conversation with the guests, but her thoughts were consumed by the discovery she had made. She couldn't shake the image of the ring on the bride's finger, nor the creeping suspicion that something far deeper was at play. She had always trusted her instincts, and right now, every fiber of her being was screaming that this woman had a connection to her family, something she had not anticipated. As the evening wore on, Evelyn found herself drifting away from the festivities, retreating into a quiet corner of the reception hall. She took a seat near a large window that overlooked the city skyline, the lights below twinkling like stars. It was a peaceful sight, but it did little to calm her racing mind. Her thoughts were like a storm, each question leading to more questions, more uncertainty. She had to know more. She had to understand why this woman was wearing the ring that had once belonged to her mother. She glanced at her phone and dialed the number of an old family friend, someone who had been a close confidant of her mother's, someone who might know more about the ring. The phone rang several times before the call was answered. Evelyn, a familiar voice said on the other end. It was Margaret, an older woman who had known Evelyn's mother for years. "What's wrong?" "I need your help, Margaret," Evelyn said, her voice tight with emotion. "I need to know about a ring, my mother's ring. It's important, and I think something's going on that I don't understand." Margaret was silent for a moment before responding. "Evelyn, what do you mean? What ring?" Evelyn explained the situation as best as she could, her voice filled with a mixture of confusion and fear. When she finished, there was a long pause on the other end. "I knew this day would come," Margaret finally said, her tone grave. "The ring. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, Evelyn. It was a key, a symbol of something much bigger. Your mother was a part of something far more complicated than you know. And now, it seems that the woman at your son's wedding, she's tied to it." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't ready to hear this, but the words hung in the air, thick with meaning. "You need to be careful, Evelyn," Margaret continued. "This is only the beginning." Evelyn's grip tightened on the phone as the weight of her discovery crushed down on her. She had been right. There was more to this woman than met the eye. And the truth, however dark, was coming for her. Unveiling the past, Evelyn felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Her mind, already consumed with the realization about the ring, now raced to piece together the fragments of her past that she had long buried. Margaret's cryptic words echoed in her ears. "Your mother was a part of something far more complicated than you know." The weight of the conversation, and the looming sense of dread that followed, hung heavily over Evelyn as she stood by the window, staring out at the distant city lights. She could no longer focus on the celebration unfolding inside the reception hall. Every laugh, every toast felt hollow, like echoes from another world. Her son, Julian, stood in the midst of it all, smiling and laughing with the guests. But Evelyn couldn't join in. The truth was beginning to unravel, and she was determined to find out exactly what it meant for her son, and for the life they had built together. Margaret's words haunted her. The ring was a key, a symbol of something bigger. What could that possibly mean? Evelyn had grown up in a small, tight-knit community, one where the secrets of the past were kept close, hidden behind the facades of ordinary lives. But now, everything was starting to fall apart, piece by piece. She walked briskly to the reception hall, her mind clouded with thoughts of the past. As she moved through the crowd, she noticed how everyone was enjoying themselves, how Julian's smile never wavered. He was so happy, so at ease, as if nothing was wrong, as if everything was perfect. But Evelyn knew better. There was something dark lingering just beneath the surface of this picture-perfect wedding, and she could not ignore it any longer. At the far end of the hall, she spotted the bride. Her name still escaped Evelyn's mind, though she knew it was something simple, like Emma or Ella. Her focus remained on the bride's hand, still adorned with the ring that had so disturbed Evelyn. There was no mistake now. Evelyn was certain. The ring was a direct link to her mother, and perhaps even to a legacy that had been kept secret for generations. Her curiosity, mingled with an unsettling sense of urgency, drove her to take a seat at a small table near the back. As she sat down, her hands trembled, gripping the edge of her napkin as she tried to collect her thoughts. She had to talk to Julian. She had to tell him what she had discovered, no matter how difficult it would be. But how could she approach him? Would he even believe her? Her phone buzzed in her hand, and Evelyn almost dropped it in her haste to answer. "It's Margaret," the voice on the other end said, crackling with static. "Evelyn, listen carefully. You need to get to the old family cabin. Now, there's more you don't know, and it's dangerous for you to stay where you are." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She could feel her pulse quicken, and a cold sweat began to form at the back of her neck. The cabin. She hadn't been there in years, not since her mother had passed away. It was a place full of memories, both good and bad. But why was Margaret urging her to go there now? What could she possibly find there? "Margaret, what's going on?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper, her mind racing with possibilities. "What is it that I don't know?" "I can't explain over the phone," Margaret replied, her tone urgent. "You need to see it for yourself. You'll understand when you get there, but you have to be careful. You're not just dealing with a piece of jewelry. This is about your mother's past, and trust me when I say, it's far more dangerous than you realize." The line went dead, leaving Evelyn with a sinking feeling in her stomach. She had no choice. She had to go. There were too many unanswered questions now, and she could not ignore the warning any longer. Without another moment's hesitation, Evelyn excused herself from the table, quietly slipping out of the reception hall and into the cool night air. The city around her seemed distant, like it belonged to another world. She hailed a cab, her mind whirling with uncertainty. The driver, a middle-aged man with a gruff voice, gave her a strange look when she mentioned the family cabin. "You sure you want to go there, ma'am?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's a long drive, and the weather's turning." "I'll be fine," Evelyn replied, her voice firm despite the growing sense of dread within her. "Just get me there, please." The ride felt long, too long, as if the universe itself was trying to prevent her from getting to the cabin. Every mile that passed was another reminder that she was venturing into unknown territory, into a past she had not dared to confront. As they drove farther into the woods, the trees grew denser, casting long shadows in the headlights. The silence in the car was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves outside and the hum of the engine. Evelyn's mind flashed back to her childhood, to the days when she and her mother had spent summers at the cabin. It had been a place of solace then, a place where they could escape the world and be together. But now it felt like a ghostly reminder of everything she had lost, of secrets buried so deep they were almost forgotten. The cab finally stopped in front of the cabin. The building looked unchanged, an old wooden structure with a weathered roof, surrounded by tall, towering trees. The wind howled through the branches, and for a moment, Evelyn hesitated. What was she walking into? What truths were hidden within those walls? "Are you sure you want me to wait here?" the cab driver asked, his voice tinged with concern. "No," Evelyn said quickly. "I'll be fine. Thank you." She stepped out of the car, the chill of the evening air biting at her skin. As she approached the front door, she felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if the cabin itself was calling her home. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle, and with a deep breath, she stepped inside. The cabin was dimly lit, the air musty with the scent of old wood and dust. Her footsteps echoed as she moved through the main room, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. The large stone fireplace, the worn leather chairs, the old wooden cabinets, everything was just as she remembered. But then something caught her eye. The small weathered chest at the back of the room, hidden behind a tapestry. It was a place she hadn't noticed before, or perhaps had forgotten about. She approached it cautiously, feeling an inexplicable pull toward it. Her fingers brushed against the rough wood of the chest, and she could almost feel the secrets it held. With a deep breath, Evelyn opened the chest, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside, wrapped in an old cloth, was a leather-bound book. She pulled it out carefully, her hands shaking, as she untied the string that held it shut. What she saw inside would change everything. The truth unveiled. The leather-bound book was old, ancient, even. Its cover was cracked, worn with age, and the pages inside seemed to be made of fragile parchment, yellowed with time. Evelyn's hands trembled as she carefully opened the book, the faint smell of old paper and leather filling her senses. For a moment, she hesitated, wondering if she was making a mistake, if the contents of this book would finally unravel the life she had carefully built. But there was no turning back now. She had come too far. The ring, Margaret's warning, the eerie sense of foreboding. Everything was pointing to this moment. This book held the answers. As she flipped through the first few pages, Evelyn's eyes were drawn to a set of handwritten notes that were clearly her mother's. The script was familiar, yet unsettling, as though written under duress. She began reading, her heart racing as the words on the pages began to connect the fragments of her past. The entries spoke of a family legacy, one that had been hidden away for decades. Evelyn's mother, Grace, had never spoken about it. She had never mentioned the connection to something far darker, something far more dangerous. The book described a secret organization, one that had operated for generations, manipulating events behind the scenes. They were the puppet masters, pulling the strings of fate, their hands in everything from politics to business, shaping the world in their image. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she read the name of the group, the Order of the Black Hand. Her mother's name appeared in the text, listed as one of the founding members, but there was something even more shocking. The book detailed the family's ties to ancient artifacts, objects of immense power, said to have the ability to change the course of history. One such artifact was the ring that Evelyn had seen on her soon-to-be daughter-in-law's finger. The realization hit Evelyn like a bolt of lightning. The ring wasn't just a family heirloom. It was the key to something much larger, something much more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The Order of the Black Hand had kept its grip on the world through these artifacts, and now Evelyn's son, Julian, had unknowingly become entangled in their web. Her mind raced as she scanned the pages further, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Her mother, Grace, had tried to distance herself from the Order, but the book made it clear that there was no escaping them. She had left behind a trail of cryptic messages, hoping that one day Evelyn would uncover the truth. But Grace had been silent for years, and now Evelyn found herself standing at the crossroads of a dangerous path, her son unknowingly walking straight into the heart of it. A cold shiver ran down Evelyn's spine as the final pages of the book were revealed. The last entry was the most unsettling of all. It described a prophecy, one that involved Julian and his wedding. The prophecy spoke of the union between two families, a marriage that would bring about a significant shift in the balance of power within the Order. And it was clear that Evelyn's son, with his mysterious connection to the ring, was at the center of it all. Evelyn's mind whirled as she tried to comprehend what this meant for her son, for his future, and for the future of everyone around them. The Order had its sights set on Julian, and his marriage to this woman, whose identity still eluded Evelyn, was the key to their plans. Was she the one? Was she a part of it too? The thought was enough to make Evelyn's blood run cold. She had to protect Julian, no matter what the cost. She had to get him away from this, away from whatever plans the Order had for him. But how could she possibly warn him without sounding insane? The man she knew as her son had grown up without knowing anything about the darkness that lay behind their family name. He had built his career, his life, on merit, never knowing that his lineage had been tangled with such danger. Evelyn stood frozen in the middle of the room, the book still in her hands, the words burning in her mind. The sound of footsteps outside the cabin door startled her, and she quickly shoved the book back into the chest, securing it with trembling hands. Her heart pounded in her chest as she listened to the footsteps grow closer. Someone was here, someone who could be connected to the Order. Her instincts kicked in, and she immediately began looking around for a way to escape. But the cabin, secluded deep in the woods, had only one entrance. She had no choice but to confront whoever was outside. The door creaked open, and in the doorway stood a tall figure, silhouetted by the dim light of the moon. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she recognized him. It was Margaret. "Evelyn, you shouldn't be here," Margaret said quietly, her tone filled with both warning and regret. "I tried to keep you away from this, but it's too late now. You've seen too much." Evelyn's mind raced, her hands still trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. How could Margaret know? Had she been working with the Order all along? Was she somehow involved in this dark legacy? Margaret stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a quiet thud. She was dressed in dark clothing, as if she had been prepared for something far more serious than a simple visit. Her expression was grim, but there was something else in her eyes, something that suggested she understood the gravity of the situation far better than Evelyn did. "I know you have questions," Margaret said, her voice soft but firm. "And I know you've seen the book. But the truth, Evelyn, is more complicated than you can imagine. You were never meant to know this, but now that you do, you have to make a choice." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at her friend. A choice? What choice? "The ring," Margaret continued, her voice growing colder. "It's not just a symbol. It's a trap. Julian is walking into a world that he can't even begin to understand. And if you want to protect him, you have to make sure the Order doesn't find out that he's the one they've been waiting for." The weight of Margaret's words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Everything she had worked so hard to protect, everything she had kept hidden for so long, was now out in the open. And the only way to protect her son, her family, was to fight back. Evelyn stood there, frozen in place. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together, and the magnitude of the situation began to sink in. The order was real, and they were watching. But Evelyn wasn't just going to let them win. She was going to fight for her son. The choice. Evelyn's hands trembled as she sat at the edge of the bed, the room swirling with confusion. The weight of Margaret's revelation pressed down on her chest like a physical burden, as if the air itself had thickened and became almost suffocating. She had known her life was complicated, but she had never realized how deeply entangled she was in the web of secrets surrounding her family. The Order of the Black Hand, the ring, Julian's fate. It was all too much to process. Margaret stood silently by the window, her eyes distant, watching the moonlight cascade through the trees. The air between them was thick with unspoken truths. Evelyn's mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of the story she had just uncovered. She could feel the sting of betrayal, but also the deep sorrow of understanding that things were far beyond her control now. She had made mistakes, so many mistakes, but this was her chance to make things right. What choice, Margaret? Evelyn's voice was steady but strained, barely more than a whisper. What do you mean by a choice? Margaret's gaze turned slowly toward her expression unreadable. The soft glow of the moon illuminated her face, and Evelyn could see the lines of exhaustion etched across her friend's features. It was clear that Margaret had lived with this burden for far too long. This was not just a fight for Julian's future. It was a battle that spanned generations, a battle that Evelyn had never even realized she was a part of. You can either protect him, Evelyn, Margaret said, her voice low and grave, or you can let him walk into the lion's den. The Order has their eyes on him, and they will not let him go easily. They're already starting to move, and if we don't act now, it will be too late. You saw what the ring can do. You saw how it marked him. Evelyn nodded slowly, her thoughts scattering. The ring had once seemed like an heirloom, a beautiful piece of jewelry passed down from a long line of family members. But now, in the light of this revelation, it felt like a ticking time bomb, a symbol of power and danger. She had never truly understood its significance, never realized how much weight the ring carried. What's the point of all of this? Evelyn asked, her voice cracking slightly. Why did my mother hide this from me? Why didn't she tell me any of this? She could have. She should have warned me. Margaret stepped closer, her expression softening. She sat down beside Evelyn, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Grace did warn you, Evelyn, she said quietly. She did in her own way, but she couldn't stop what was coming. Neither could I. There were too many forces at play. The Order, they have a way of controlling everything around them. No one can fight them alone, not even Grace. She tried, and that's why she pulled away. But it's up to you now. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. But why me? Why did it have to be me? I just want to protect Julian, to give him a future that's safe and free of all this darkness. How do I protect him from something like this? Margaret's eyes locked with hers. That's the choice, Evelyn. You can try to protect him the way you always have, by keeping him safe, keeping him unaware. Or you can help him understand, help him step into the role he was born to play, to take control of his own destiny. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and oppressive. Evelyn's head swam with conflicting emotions. All she had ever wanted was to shield her son from harm. She had never wanted him to inherit the legacy of secrets and power that came with being part of this family. But the truth was undeniable now. Julian was already part of it, and the events unfolding were far beyond her control. Evelyn's gaze turned to the ring that lay on the small wooden table beside her. It gleamed in the dim light, its smooth surface reflecting the shadows around it. She remembered Julian's joy when he had proposed to his fiancée, the way he had shown her the ring with such pride. How could she have known then what this simple piece of jewelry would come to mean? I can't just tell him the truth, Evelyn whispered, more to herself than to Margaret. He'll never believe it. He won't understand. Margaret gave a soft sigh. You may be right. He may not believe you at first, but eventually he'll see the truth. The Order doesn't care about your son or your family. They only care about power, and Julian is a part of their plan whether he realizes it or not. Evelyn stood up abruptly, the weight of the decision beginning to press on her shoulders. There had to be another way, a way to protect him without dragging him into this nightmare. Where do we even begin? Evelyn asked, her voice tight. How do we stop them? How do we keep Julian safe? Margaret's eyes narrowed, and she stood up to face her. First, you need to find out everything you can about the Order. Their influence runs deeper than you can imagine, and their plans for Julian are already in motion. We don't have much time, Evelyn. The wedding is coming up, and once they have him in their grasp, it'll be too late. Evelyn felt her heart sink. She had been so caught up in the excitement of Julian's wedding, in the hope that it would mark the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. But now, that hope seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by the very real threat that loomed over them. As she paced the room, trying to make sense of everything, Margaret's voice broke through her thoughts. There's one more thing you need to know, she said, her tone grave. There's a way to break the chain. A way to stop the Order from using Julian for their own gain, but it will come at a cost. Evelyn stopped in her tracks, her heart racing again. A cost? What cost? Margaret hesitated, her eyes dropping to the floor for a moment before she met Evelyn's gaze again. The cost is your own life, Evelyn. The words hit her like a slap. For a moment, everything seemed to spin out of control. Her legs felt weak, and she collapsed back onto the bed, her hands clutching at the fabric beneath her. No, I can't. It's the only way, Margaret said quietly. To protect Julian, to stop the Order, someone from your family must make the ultimate sacrifice. It's written in the prophecy. You can't outrun destiny. If you want to save him, you will have to give up everything. Your freedom, your life, your future. Evelyn felt a wave of cold dread wash over her, but there was something else, a fierce determination that burned brighter than the fear. She had spent her life protecting her son, shielding him from a world she had never wanted him to know. But this was different. This was a fight for his life, for his future. I'll do it, Evelyn said, her voice shaking but resolute. If it means keeping him safe, I will do whatever it takes. Margaret's eyes softened, a flicker of admiration crossing her face. You're a brave woman, Evelyn. I only hope you're prepared for what's to come. Evelyn nodded, the weight of the decision settling in her bones. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would do whatever it took to save her son. The battle was just beginning, and she was ready to fight.